The morning alarm echoed through the metal corridors of the Galactic Defense Academy like the death cry of some ancient beast. Cadet Marcus Chun rolled out of his narrow bunk with the same careful precision he applied to everything else in his life. No guasti movements, no unnecessary noise, just the quiet efficiency that had made him nearly invisible during his 3 years at the academy. Around him, his dormmate aliens stirred with their usual chaos. Zephyrian cadets unfolded their crystalline wings with musical chimes. The massive Carathian bear people growled their morning greetings in voices that shook the walls. Ethereal sylphids floated past like living smoke, their telepathic chatter creating a background hum that most humans found overwhelming. Marcus had learned to tune it all out. He dressed in his standard-issue uniform, made his bed with military corners that would pass any inspection, and gathered his training materials without speaking to anyone. It wasn't that he disliked his fellow cadets. He simply had nothing to say that they would find interesting. "Hey, Silent Sam," called out Corex, a massive Carathian whose idea of friendly teasing involved nicknames that stuck like battle scars. "You gonna actually speak in tactical class today, or just sit there like a statue again?" Marcus nodded politely and headed for the door. Behind him, he heard the familiar whispered conversations that followed him everywhere. The other cadets had theories about his quietness. Some thought he was stupid. Others believed he was arrogant. A few suspected he was hiding some terrible secret. They were all wrong, but Marcus saw no reason to correct them. The academy corridors bustled with a morning rush of over 10,000 cadets from 47 different species. The Galactic Defense Force drew recruits from across the known galaxy, training them to serve on mixed-species crews that protected trade routes and settled disputes between worlds. It was considered the highest honor for any young being to be accepted into the academy. Marcus walked through it all like a ghost. He had learned early that humans were something of a curiosity here. Earth had only joined the Galactic Federation 50 years ago, making humanity one of the newest species in the Alliance. Most aliens viewed humans as interesting, but ultimately unremarkable. They were neither the strongest, nor the smartest, nor the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy. They were just adequate. This suited Marcus perfectly. Adequate meant unnoticed. Unnoticed meant safe. He slipped into his seat in advanced tactical theory, just as Instructor Veltar began the lesson. The massive, spider-like arachnoid clicked her mandibles in disapproval at the last-minute arrivals, her 8 eyes scanning the amphitheater for signs of disrespect. "Today we examine the Battle of Kepler Station," Veltar announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen real combat. 200 years ago, this single engagement changed the course of galactic history and established many of the tactical doctrines we still use today. Marcus straightened slightly. He knew this battle. He knew it better than anyone else in the room, though he would never admit it. A holographic display materialized in the center of the amphitheater, showing the Kepler system in miniature. The star burned like a tiny sun, surrounded by its planets, and the massive space station that had once served as a crucial trade hub. The situation appeared hopeless, Veltar continued. The Void Hunters had emerged from dark space with a fleet of unprecedented size. Over 3,000 ships, including their massive Dreadnought-class vessels that had never been defeated in open combat. They surrounded Kepler Station with the clear intention of enslaving every living being in the system. The hologram shifted, showing the dark, angular ships of the Void Hunters as they took up positions around the station. Even in miniature, their vessels looked menacing. Unlike the sleek designs favored by most galactic civilizations, Void Hunter ships were built for intimidation as much as combat. Jagged edges, weapon ports that glowed like hungry eyes, and hull designs that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The station's defenses were minimal, Veltar explained. A small garrison of Federation forces, maybe 200 ships total, and most of those were lightly armed patrol vessels. By all strategic calculations, the battle should have lasted less than 6 hours, ending in complete victory for the Void Hunters. A Zephyrian cadet raised one crystalline hand. Instructor Veltar, didn't the Federation have any reinforcements in the area? An excellent question, Cadet Shimmersong. The nearest Federation fleet was 3 days away at maximum warp. Even if they had been alerted the moment the Void Hunters arrived, they would have been far too late to affect the outcome. Marcus found himself remembering details that weren't in any of the official records. The smell of recycled air thick with fear. The sound of hull breaches echoing through the station's corridors like thunder. The faces of civilians who had trusted the Federation to protect them, only to find themselves abandoned when the Void Hunters came. What changed the course of the battle, Veltar continued, was the arrival of a single human ship. The hologram updated, showing a small vessel approaching the edge of the Void Hunter fleet. Compared to the massive enemy dreadnoughts, the human ship looked like an insect facing down a pack of predators. This ship, designated Phoenix 7, contained a crew of just 12 individuals. They made contact with the station commander and requested permission to assist in the defense. Several cadets laughed at this. The idea of 12 beings making any difference against 3,000 enemy ships struck them as absurd. Marcus didn't laugh. He remembered the conversation differently than the official record suggested. The station commander initially refused the offer, Veltar said, her mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement among her species. However, the human captain was persistent. Eventually, permission was granted, perhaps more out of courtesy than any real hope of assistance. The laughter died as the hologram showed what happened next. The small human ship didn't join the defensive formations around the station. Instead, it accelerated directly toward the center of the Void Hunter fleet. What followed defied every principle of accepted naval tactics, Veltar explained. The Phoenix 7 began transmitting on all frequencies, using encryption codes that should have been impossible for them to possess. They identified themselves as representatives of something called the Terran War Council and demanded the immediate withdrawal of all Void Hunter forces. A Sylphid cadet flickered with confusion, their translucent form shimmering with bioluminescent patterns that indicated puzzlement. Instructor, what was the Terran War Council? I find no reference to such an organization in Federation databases. That, Cadet Whisperwind, remains one of the great mysteries of the battle. No such organization existed in any Federation records, either before or after the engagement. When questioned later, surviving crew members of the Phoenix 7 claimed ignorance of the transmission. Marcus knew better. The Terran War Council had been very real, just not in any way the Federation would have understood. It had been a shadow organization, operating in the spaces between official government structures. It had been necessary during humanity's darker years, when survival had required methods that peaceful civilizations would never accept. The Void Hunters' response was predictable, Veltar continued. They opened fire on the Phoenix 7 with enough concentrated firepower to reduce a small moon to debris. However, something unprecedented occurred. The hologram showed beams of energy lancing out from dozens of Void Hunter ships, all converging on the small human vessel. Just before impact, the Phoenix 7 simply vanished. The ship had somehow achieved instantaneous spatial displacement without any visible means of propulsion, Veltar explained. It reappeared 3 seconds later, directly behind the Void Hunter flagship. What followed was 15 minutes of the most extraordinary space combat ever recorded. The Phoenix 7 moved through the enemy fleet like a predator among prey, appearing and disappearing at will. Every time it materialized, Void Hunter ships died. Not just disabled or damaged, but completely destroyed with surgical precision. Marcus watched his classmates' expressions change from amusement to amazement to something approaching fear. They were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something far beyond normal military capability. The human ship's weapons were unlike anything in Federation arsenals, Veltar noted. Energy signatures suggested technology at least 2 centuries ahead of contemporary standards. Each shot was perfectly placed to cause maximum damage while conserving ammunition. The hologram showed the tide of battle turning. As more Void Hunter ships fell, their formations began to break apart. Ships that had maintained perfect discipline moments before started showing signs of panic. Psychological warfare. Observed a Carathian cadet, his massive frame leaning forward with interest. The humans weren't just destroying ships, they were breaking enemy morale. Precisely, Cadet Thunderclaw. However, the most significant moment came when the Phoenix 7 disabled the Void Hunter flagship rather than destroying it outright. The hologram showed the massive enemy command ship drifting helplessly, its weapons offline, but its hull intact. The Phoenix 7 approached slowly, almost cautiously. What happened next has never been satisfactorily explained, Veltar said. The Phoenix 7 docked with a disabled flagship. The boarding action lasted exactly 17 minutes. When the human crew returned to their ship, they carried with them a single Void Hunter prisoner. Marcus remembered that prisoner. The creature had been ancient even by the standards of its long-lived species, its exoskeleton scarred by countless battles. It had looked at the humans with something that might have been respect. The prisoner was turned over to Federation authorities, Veltar continued, but not before making a statement that was recorded by multiple witnesses. According to these sources, the creature identified the humans as the ones who taught the galaxy to fear the dark. The amphitheater fell silent. Most galactic species had myths about ancient terrors that had once stalked between the stars. The idea that humans might be connected to those legends was deeply unsettling. Following this statement, the remaining Void Hunter fleet withdrew from the system. They have not been seen in Federation space since that day. The Battle of Kepler Station ended not with the destruction of an enemy force, but with their voluntary retreat. Instructor Veltar deactivated the hologram, allowing normal lighting to return to the amphitheater. For your assignment this week, I want you to analyze the tactical decisions made during this engagement. Pay particular attention to the unconventional methods employed by the Phoenix 7 crew. Remember that effective tactics often involve doing the unexpected. As cadets began filing out of the amphitheater, discussing the lesson in excited voices, Marcus remained in his seat. He stared at the empty space where the hologram had been, remembering details that would never appear in any official record. He remembered Captain Sarah Chun, his grandmother, explaining why some secrets were too dangerous to share. He remembered the weight of responsibility that came with certain kinds of knowledge. Most of all, he remembered the promise he had made to keep the past buried. Cadet Chun. Marcus looked up to find Instructor Veltar approaching his seat. Her 8 eyes studied him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Yes, Instructor. You seem particularly focused during today's lesson. Do you have some special interest in ancient military history? Marcus considered his words carefully. I find the tactical innovations interesting. The Phoenix 7 crew showed remarkable adaptability. Indeed they did. Velitas mandibles click thoughtfully. Tell me, have you given any consideration to specializing in tactical analysis? Your academic scores suggest you have an aptitude for strategic thinking. I hadn't really thought about it, Marcus replied, which was mostly true. He had tried very hard not to think about tactics or strategy or anything else that might draw attention to capabilities he preferred to keep hidden. Perhaps you should. The galaxy always has need of officers who can think beyond conventional parameters. Veltar Post. Your grandmother was human, was she not? From Earth. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Yes, Instructor. She passed away when I was young. I see. And did she ever speak of her military service? She was a civilian, Marcus said, which was technically true. Sarah Chun had never held an official rank in any recognized military organization. Of course. Veltar's compound eyes seemed to study him for a moment longer. Well, I look forward to reading your analysis of the Battle of Kepler Station. I suspect you may have some unique insights to offer. As the instructor moved away, Marcus gathered his materials and headed for the exit. He told himself that the conversation meant nothing. Veltar was simply a teacher encouraging a student. There was no reason to think she suspected anything. But as he walked through the corridors toward his next class, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully maintained invisibility might be starting to crack. And if that happened, he would have to make some very difficult decisions about just how much of the truth he was willing to reveal. Because the truth about the Battle of Kepler Station was far more complicated than any official record suggested. And the truth about Marcus Chun was more dangerous than anyone at the Academy could possibly imagine. The Phoenix 7 hadn't been crewed by random human volunteers. It had been staffed by members of the Terran War Council, an organization that had spent decades preparing for threats that the rest of humanity hoped would never come. They had been the best of the best, warriors trained in techniques that most civilized species would consider barbaric. And they had all been his family. Marcus made it through the rest of his classes without incident, but he could feel eyes watching him more closely than usual. Word had a way of traveling quickly through the academy, especially when it involved the quiet human cadet who never spoke up in class. That evening, as he sat in the library studying advanced xenobiology, Marcus became aware of a presence nearby. He looked up to see Cadet Lyria Quillsong perched on the edge of a nearby chair. The young Zephyrian's crystalline features caught the light in rainbow patterns, and her wing membranes hummed with barely contained energy. "You're Marcus Chun," she said without preamble. "The human who never talks." "I talk," Marcus replied mildly. "Just not very often. I was in tactical class today. You seem to know a lot about the Battle of Kepler Station." Her large eyes studied him with the intense focus that made Zephyrians such effective reconnaissance specialists. More than someone should from just reading textbooks. Marcus kept his expression neutral. "I pay attention in class." "So do I. And I noticed that you started reacting to details before Instructor Veltar mentioned them. Like you already knew what was coming next." This was exactly what Marcus had been afraid of. Zephyrians were naturally observant, their crystal-based biology allowing them to detect subtle changes in electromagnetic fields that most species couldn't perceive. If Lyria had noticed his reactions, others might have as well. "I've read about the battle before," he said carefully. "It's a famous engagement." "Famous, yes, but also classified above our current clearance level." Lyria's wings chimed softly as she shifted position. "I try to access additional records this afternoon. Most of the detailed files are restricted to senior officers only." Marcus felt another chill. If Lyria had been researching the battle, she might eventually find information he couldn't afford to have revealed. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because I think you're more than you pretend to be," she replied bluntly. "And because I'm curious about what a human is really capable of when they stop trying to be invisible." Before Marcus could respond, the library's evening chimes sounded, indicating that quiet hours were about to begin. Lyria rose gracefully from her chair, her crystalline features reflecting the soft lighting. "Think about what I said, Marcus Chun," she whispered. "The galaxy might need humans to be more than adequate, and you might not be able to stay quiet forever." As she glided away between the library stacks, Marcus stared down at his xenobiology textbook without really seeing the words. The careful life he had built at the academy was beginning to unravel, and he wasn't sure there was anything he could do to stop it. Outside the library windows, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, the same stars that had witnessed the Battle of Kepler Station 2 centuries ago. Somewhere among those points of light, the descendants of the Void Hunters might still be lurking, waiting for the galaxy to forget the lessons learned in that long-ago engagement. Marcus closed his textbook and headed back to his dormitory. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for his carefully maintained facade to slip. And with each passing day, the weight of his family's legacy grew heavier on his shoulders. He had come to the academy hoping to serve quietly, to contribute to galactic peace without drawing attention to the darker capabilities that ran in his bloodline. But Lyria was right about one thing. The galaxy had a way of forcing beings to become more than they wanted to be. The question was whether Marcus could continue to protect the secrets of the past while preparing for whatever threats the future might bring, and whether anyone would trust him with the truth when the time finally came to stop being invisible. Marcus woke before the alarm, as he had every day for the past 3 years. The habit came from his grandmother, who had trained him to be alert even in his sleep. "The galaxy doesn't wait for you to be ready," she used to say, "so you'd better be ready before it asks." He lay in the darkness, listening to the breathing patterns of his dormmates. Corax's deep, rumbling snores, the musical harmonics of the Zephyrians as they processed dreams, the complete silence of the sylphids, who didn't breathe in any way humans understood. Each species had its own rhythms, its own vulnerabilities, its own strengths. His grandmother had taught him to catalog these details automatically, without conscious thought. Know your environment. Know your allies. Know your enemies. The problem was that after 3 years at the academy, Marcus still wasn't sure which category his fellow cadets fell into. The alarm sounded, and the dormitory erupted into its usual controlled chaos. Marcus rose quietly, made his bed with automatic precision, and gathered his gear. Today was different, though. Today included advanced combat simulation, a class he had been carefully mediocre in for 3 years. "Morning, Silent Sam," Corax called out, but there was something different in his tone. The massive Carathian's eyes held a calculating look that hadn't been there before. "Heard you made quite an impression in tactical class yesterday." Marcus nodded politely and headed for the door, but found his path blocked by Drac, another Carathian whose scarred hide spoke of actual combat experience. Unlike most Academy cadets, who came straight from their homeworlds, Drac had served in the Frontier Guards before applying for advanced training. "You know what I think?" Drac rumbled, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that made smaller species nervous. "I think our quiet human friend has been playing games with us." "Games?" Marcus kept his voice level, uninterested. "Games," Drac repeated, "pretending to be something you're not. Question is, why would someone want to hide their real abilities at a place like this?" The dormitory had gone quiet. Even the usually chattering Zephyrians had stopped their morning conversation to listen. Marcus could feel dozens of eyes on him, evaluating, judging, waiting for his response. "I think you're overthinking things," Marcus said calmly. "I'm just here to learn, same as everyone else." Drac's laugh was like rocks grinding together. "We'll see about that. Combat simulation today, right? Should be interesting to watch you try to stay mediocre when lives are on the line." "Simulated lives?" Marcus pointed out. "Sometimes the simulation is more real than you think," Drac replied, and there was something in his voice that made Marcus look at him more carefully. The morning proceeded normally until Marcus reached advanced combat simulation. The class was held in the Academy's most sophisticated training facility, a vast chamber that could replicate any environment and any tactical situation. Instructor Veltar supervised, but the actual combat training was handled by Commander Thex, a grizzled Arcturian whose cybernetic implants spoke of hard-won experience. "Today we test individual combat skills," Commander Thex announced, his artificial voice carrying across the assembled cadets. "Each of you will face a scenario tailored to your species' capabilities and training level. Success is measured not just by completing the objective, but by demonstrating tactical thinking under pressure." Marcus found himself assigned to a scenario involving hostage rescue aboard a damaged space station. Standard stuff, the kind of simulation he had completed dozens of times with carefully calculated competence. Never excellent, never terrible, always forgettable. But as he entered the simulation chamber, Marcus noticed several senior cadets gathering around the observation screens. Lyria was there, her crystalline features reflecting the display lights. Drac had positioned himself where he could see everything clearly. Even some cadets he didn't recognize had found reasons to observe his performance. The simulation began with Marcus materializing on a damaged station corridor. Emergency lighting cast red shadows everywhere, and the distant sound of decompression alarms created a sense of urgency. According to his briefing, 6 civilians were trapped in a sealed section that was losing atmosphere. He had 30 minutes to reach them before life support failed completely. Marcus started forward using his standard approach. Careful, methodical, always choosing the safest available option. He checked each junction thoroughly, avoided anything that might be construed as showing unusual skill, and made sure his progress looked appropriately difficult. But 15 minutes into the simulation, something changed. The scenario parameters shifted without warning. What had been a straightforward rescue mission suddenly became something else entirely. New hostile contacts appeared on his sensor display, moving with coordination that suggested professional training. The trapped civilians began transmitting distress calls that included technical details about the station's systems that ordinary passengers wouldn't know. Marcus stopped moving and considered his options. This wasn't the simulation he had been briefed for. Someone had modified the parameters, turning a routine exercise into something far more complex. The question was whether they were testing his ability to adapt or testing something else entirely. He activated his comm system to request clarification from the instructors, but received only static in response. That confirmed it. This wasn't a standard simulation anymore. Someone was running their own program, using the Academy's systems for purposes that definitely weren't part of the regular curriculum. Marcus stood at a junction in the simulated corridor and made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing with his carefully mediocre approach, he decided to trust his grandmother's training. He moved. The observers watching the screens saw something impossible. The quiet, unremarkable human cadet transformed into something else entirely. Marcus flowed through the damaged station like liquid shadow, reading the environment with senses that seemed enhanced beyond normal human capability. He bypassed security checkpoints that should have taken minutes to disable. He navigated through sections where the artificial gravity was failing using movement techniques that suggested training in zero-G combat. Most disturbing of all, he seemed to anticipate the location of hostile contacts before they appeared on his sensors. "What is he doing?" breathed one of the observing cadets. Commander Thex studied the readings with growing alarm. The humans' movement patterns were unlike anything in Federation training manuals. They were efficient beyond anything taught at the Academy, but they were also familiar in a way that made the Arcturians' cybernetic systems run stress diagnostics. Marcus reached the trapped civilians in 8 minutes, a time that should have been impossible given the obstacles in his path. But instead of immediately beginning rescue procedures, he paused at the sealed door and listened. Something was wrong. The distress calls had been too detailed, too technical. Real civilians wouldn't know enough about station systems to provide the kind of information he had been hearing. And the timing of the hostile contacts had been too convenient, arriving just when his original mission parameters would have become boring to observe. Marcus activated his cutting tools and began working on the door seal, but not in the way he would have if he believed civilians were actually trapped inside. Instead, he prepared for contact with hostiles who were using the rescue scenario as cover for something else. The door opened, and Marcus found himself facing 3 figures in combat armor that definitely wasn't part of the simulation's standard equipment. They moved with the coordinated precision of a real military unit, and their weapons were powered and ready. Cadet Marcus Chun, one of them said, the voice electronically distorted. "You are performing beyond acceptable parameters for your stated skill level. Explain." Marcus considered his response carefully. These weren't Academy instructors running a modified simulation. There was something else, something that had access to Academy systems but operated outside normal command structures. "I adapted to changing circumstances," he replied neutrally. "Isn't that what tactical training is supposed to teach? Your adaptation demonstrates capabilities that exceed your psychological profile." The figure continued. "Our analysis suggests you possess training that is not reflected in your Academy records." "Your analysis is wrong," Marcus said, but he was already calculating distances and angles. If this went bad, he would need to disable all 3 opponents before they could transmit whatever information they were gathering. Perhaps you were exactly what our research suggested you might be." The figure paused. "Tell us about your grandmother, Marcus Chun. Tell us about Sarah Chun and her service with the Terran War Council." Marcus went very still. The Terran War Council was supposed to be a secret lost to history. If these people knew about his grandmother's connection to that organization, they knew far more than they should, which meant they were either Federation intelligence operatives conducting some kind of investigation, or they were something much more dangerous. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said. "We believe you do. We believe you have been trained in techniques that were developed during humanity's pre-Federation conflicts. We believe you represent a capability that certain parties would find very valuable." One of the other figures shifted position, moving to cut off Marcus's most obvious escape route. The movement was professional, suggesting military training that went well beyond academy standards. "You have a choice," the first figure continued. "You can continue pretending to be something you're not, in which case this conversation never happened, and you return to mediocre academy performance. Or you can acknowledge what you really are and learn about opportunities that might interest someone with your background." Marcus understood the threat beneath the polite words. These people weren't here to recruit him. They were here to identify him as a potential security risk and then decide what to do about it. If he admitted to capabilities beyond those of a normal cadet, he would disappear into whatever black operation they represented. If he denied everything, they might decide he was too dangerous to leave alone anyway. But there was a third option, one his grandmother had prepared him for during those long training sessions in Earth's wilderness. Marcus smiled, and for the first time in 3 years at the academy, he let these strangers see exactly what Sarachen's grandson was capable of. The first figure barely had time to register the change in Marcus's expression before the human moved. Not the careful, controlled movements of a cadet trying to avoid attention, but the flowing, lethal efficiency of someone trained to end threats quickly and quietly. Marcus disabled the first figure's weapon with a strike that should have been impossible for someone without enhanced reflexes. He used the figure's own momentum to throw them into their companion, then rolled past the third opponent while drawing a training knife that suddenly looked far more dangerous than academy equipment should. When the movement stopped 3 seconds later, all 3 figures were on the ground, their weapons scattered, and Marcus was standing over them with the kind of calm expression that suggested this level of violence was routine for him. "You wanted to know about my training," Marcus said quietly. "Now you know." The simulation environment flickered and dissolved, revealing the academy training chamber. Marcus found himself surrounded by shocked observers and instructors whose expressions ranged from amazement to alarm. The 3 figures on the ground were revealed as senior cadets he didn't recognize, wearing advanced training gear that definitely wasn't standard academy issue. Commander Thek stepped forward, his cybernetic systems still running diagnostics on what they had just witnessed. "Cadet Chun, explain your actions." Marcus looked around the chamber, taking in the faces of his observers. Lyria's crystalline features were bright with excitement. Drax's expression showed respect, mixed with something that might have been fear. The other cadets looked like they were seeing him for the first time. "They modified the simulation without authorization," Marcus said calmly. "They claimed to have information about my family that should be classified. When they attempted to threaten me, I responded according to my training." "What training?" Commander Thex asked. "Your academy records indicate standard human physical education, nothing more." Marcus met the instructor's mechanical gaze without flinching. "My grandmother taught me some things before she died. Self-defense techniques, basic survival skills, nothing that should violate academy regulations." It was true as far as it went. Sarah Chun had taught her grandson many things during their time together. The fact that those lessons had included counterinterrogation techniques, stealth infiltration, and 17 different ways to disable an armed opponent without killing them was something Marcus saw no need to elaborate on. Instructor Veltar approached the 3 disabled cadets, her multiple eyes examining their equipment with professional interest. "These are not academy training devices," she observed. "Commander Thex, I recommend we investigate how these individuals gained access to our simulation systems." As medical personnel tended to the 3 unconscious figures, Marcus found himself the center of attention in a way he had spent 3 years trying to avoid. Cadets who had barely acknowledged his existence were now studying him with the kind of intensity usually reserved for dangerous predators. Well, Corix rumbled, his massive frame blocking Marcus's path to the exit. Looks like Silent Sam has been holding out on us. I defended myself, Marcus replied. That's all. That's all. Drac laughed, but there was respect in the sound now. Brother, I've seen frontier combat, and what you just did was better than anything I learned in the field. Where exactly did your grandmother learn to fight like that? Marcus considered his response. The truth was that Sarah Chun had learned to fight in places that didn't officially exist, against enemies that the Federation preferred to forget. She had been part of a generation of humans who had prepared for threats that most civilized species couldn't imagine. She was a practical woman, Marcus said finally. She believed in being prepared. Lyria glided closer, her wings chiming with excitement. That was incredible. The way you moved, it was like you could see what they were going to do before they did it. Is that a human ability? No, Marcus said honestly. That's a Chun family ability. Before anyone could ask what he meant by that, Commander Thex called for attention. All cadets will report to their assigned instructors for debriefing regarding this incident. Cadet Chun, you will remain here for additional questioning. As the other cadets reluctantly filed out of the chamber, Marcus found himself alone with the instructors and the three unconscious figures who had tried to interrogate him. He had revealed capabilities he had spent years hiding, but he wasn't sure he'd had any choice in the matter. The carefully constructed facade of Marcus Chun, mediocre human cadet, was finally cracking. What emerged from beneath that mask would either help him serve the galaxy more effectively or destroy any chance he had of living the quiet life he had planned. But as he watched Instructor Veltar examine the mysterious equipment, Marcus realized that quiet might no longer be an option. Someone was very interested in his family's history, and they had resources that went well beyond academy training programs. The Battle of Kepler Station had ended 200 years ago, but its echoes were apparently still reverberating through the galaxy. And Marcus Chun, whether he wanted to or not, was about to become part of that continuing story. The debriefing room felt smaller than it should have, despite being designed to accommodate multiple species. Marcus sat across from Commander Thex and Instructor Veltar, with Admiral Zareth observing from the corner. The Admiral was a Selenian, her pale blue skin and large black eyes giving her an otherworldly appearance that most species found unsettling. She had arrived at the Academy within hours of the simulation incident, which suggested she had been monitoring the situation from the beginning. The three individuals who modified your simulation have been identified, Commander Thex began, his cybernetic voice carrying no emotion. They're not Academy cadets. They're operatives working for an organization called the Galactic Security Assessment Bureau. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but internally he was calculating the implications. A security bureau with resources to infiltrate Academy systems and conduct unauthorized operations was exactly the kind of organization his grandmother had warned him about. Their mission parameters included gathering intelligence on cadets who demonstrate capabilities beyond their official records. Instructor Veltar added, You, Cadet Chun, appear to have been their primary target. Why? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Admiral Zareth stepped forward from her corner position. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Because someone has been very interested in descendants of Terran War Council members, she said bluntly. And because the Battle of Kepler Station is about to become relevant again. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. What do you mean? 3 days ago, long-range sensors detected anomalous energy signatures in the Void Reach, the region of space beyond Federation borders where the Void Hunters retreated after their defeat at Kepler Station. Admiral Zareth activated a holographic display showing star charts that Marcus recognized from his grandmother's private files. The signatures match Void Hunter technology. The room fell silent except for the soft humming of the Academy's environmental systems. Marcus stared at the display, seeing patterns that would have meant nothing to most observers, but were terrifyingly familiar to someone raised on stories of humanity's darkest conflicts. They're mobilizing again, he said quietly. That is our assessment, Admiral Zareth confirmed. Intelligence suggests they have spent the past 2 centuries rebuilding their fleets and developing new technologies. More concerning, they appear to have allies now. Species that were not part of their original force structure. Commander Thex leaned forward, his mechanical components whirring softly. The Federation Council is debating response options, but we face a significant problem. Most of our current tactical doctrines are based on the assumption that Void Hunters fight the same way they did 200 years ago. If they have evolved their methods, we could be facing an enemy we don't understand. Marcus finished. Exactly. Admiral Zareth manipulated the display, showing fleet movements and energy signatures that suggested massive military preparations. Which brings us to why you are here, Cadet Chen. The Federation needs to understand how the Phoenix 7 achieved what it did at Kepler Station. We need to know if human capabilities from that era can be replicated or expanded. Marcus understood now why the security operatives had been so interested in him. The galaxy was about to face the return of humanity's oldest enemy, and the leaders who should have been preparing for that threat were instead trying to understand secrets that had been deliberately buried. I don't know anything about the Phoenix 7's capabilities, he said carefully. My grandmother died when I was 12. She never discussed her military service. It was technically true. Sarah Chun had never explicitly discussed her official service records, because she had never had any official service records. The Terran War Council had operated outside traditional military structures, using methods that civilized governments preferred not to acknowledge. Instructor Veltar's mandibles clicked in what might have been skepticism. Yet you displayed combat techniques today that suggest training far beyond standard civilian self-defense. Your psychological profile indicates unusual tactical awareness, and your genetic markers show enhancement patterns consistent with military conditioning programs. Marcus felt another chill. If they had conducted genetic analysis, they would have found evidence of modifications that went back generations in the Chun family line. Enhancements designed to produce soldiers capable of fighting enemies that conventional forces couldn't handle. Enhancement patterns? He asked. Increased reflexes, improved spatial awareness, enhanced pattern recognition, Admiral Zareth listed. All within the range of natural human variation, but clustered in ways that suggest selective breeding or genetic modification. These patterns appear in approximately 0.1% of the human population, and they're concentrated in specific family lines. Families with connections to pre-Federation military organizations, Commander Thex added. Organizations like the Terran War Council. Marcus realized that his grandmother's precautions had been insufficient. She had taught him to hide his abilities, but she hadn't been able to hide his genetics. In a galaxy where most species kept detailed biological records, being descended from enhanced soldiers was like carrying a beacon that advertised his capabilities to anyone who knew what to look for. What exactly are you asking me to do? He said finally. Admiral Zareth deactivated the holographic display and moved to stand directly in front of him. Her large black eyes seemed to look through him rather than at him. We are asking you to help us understand your grandmother's legacy, she said, and to consider the possibility that the galaxy may need that legacy to survive what is coming. Before Marcus could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the academy. Emergency lights bathed the debriefing room in red, and automated voices announced a security alert that sent instructors and cadets scrambling for emergency stations. Commander Thex's cybernetic systems immediately interfaced with the Academy's communication network. Unscheduled ship arrival, he reported. Single vessel, transmitting Federation identification codes, but approaching on an unauthorized vector. Specifications. Admiral Zareth demanded. Small, fast, heavily armed. Design profile suggests advanced stealth capabilities. Commander Thex paused as more data flowed through his systems. Admiral, the ship is requesting immediate communication with Academy leadership regarding a matter of galactic security. Marcus watched the exchange with growing unease. The timing of this arrival, so soon after their discussion of Void Hunter activity, suggested connections that he didn't like. Patch the communication through to this room, Admiral Zareth ordered. The holographic display reactivated, showing the bridge of a ship unlike anything Marcus had seen in Federation service. The technology looked human, but advanced beyond current Earth capabilities. The person who appeared on the screen was definitely human, but wearing a uniform that belonged to no organization Marcus recognized. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Terran Defense Initiative ship Nightfall, the figure said. I am requesting immediate communication with Cadet Marcus Chun regarding a matter of extreme urgency. Marcus felt the bottom drop out of his world. The Terran Defense Initiative was another shadow organization from humanity's past, one that his grandmother had mentioned only in whispers. If they were revealing themselves now, the situation was worse than anything the Federation leadership suspected. I am Admiral Zareth, commanding officer of this facility, the Admiral replied. State your business with Cadet Chun. Captain Vasquez's expression didn't change, but Marcus could see the calculation in her eyes. Admiral, with respect, this conversation needs to include only personnel with appropriate security clearances. Cadet Chun, are you prepared to learn about your family's actual history? Before Marcus could respond, Admiral Zareth stepped forward. Captain, you are in Federation space without proper authorization. Any communication with Academy personnel must be approved through proper channels. Admiral, Captain Vasquez said quietly, the proper channels are about to become irrelevant. 3 hours ago, a Void Hunter advance force destroyed the Kershan system. 2 billion lives lost in less than 30 minutes. The war that ended at Kepler Station is beginning again, and this time they're not coming alone. The debriefing room fell silent, except for the continuing alarm sound from the Academy corridors. Marcus stared at the holographic display, processing the implications of what he had just heard. Kershan was a fortified system, Commander Thex said slowly. Multiple defense platforms, an entire Federation fleet. All destroyed, Captain Vasquez confirmed. The Void Hunters have new allies, new technologies, and new strategies. The Federation's conventional forces won't be sufficient to stop them. Cadet Chun, your grandmother spent her life preparing for this day. The time has come for you to decide whether you will honor that preparation. Marcus looked around the room at the faces watching him. Admiral Zareth's expression was calculating, weighing political and military considerations. Commander Thex was processing tactical data through his cybernetic systems. Instructor Veltar was studying him with the intensity she usually reserved for dangerous specimens. But it was the face on the holographic display that held his attention. Captain Vasquez looked like his grandmother had in the old photographs, the ones taken before the Battle of Kepler Station. Confident, dangerous, and carrying the weight of knowledge that most people couldn't handle. What exactly are you asking me to do? Marcus asked. I'm asking you to come home, Captain Vasquez replied. The Terran Defense Initiative has maintained a presence in deep space for 2 centuries, preparing for the Void Hunters' return. We have ships, weapons, and tactics that the Federation doesn't know exist. But we need people who carry the genetic heritage and training of the original War Council members. And if I refuse? Captain Vasquez's expression darkened. Then, in 6 months, there won't be a Federation left to refuse. The Void Hunters didn't retreat from Kepler Station because they were defeated. They retreated because they were learning. Now they're back with allies who have spent 2 centuries studying how to defeat the tactics that saved the galaxy once before. Admiral Zareth moved to stand between Marcus and the holographic display. Cadet Chun, you are a Federation officer candidate. Any decision regarding your service must be made through proper military channels. With respect, Admiral, Marcus said quietly, I was never actually yours to command. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Marcus had spent 3 years pretending to be something he wasn't, but the time for pretense was ending. The quiet life he had planned, the careful invisibility he had cultivated, all of it was about to become irrelevant. Cadet Chun, Instructor Veltar said, her voice carrying a warning, consider your obligations to the Academy and to your fellow cadets. Marcus thought about Lyria, with her crystalline beauty and sharp intelligence. About Corex and Drac, who had offered friendship despite his determination to remain isolated. About the thousands of young beings who had come to the Academy hoping to serve the galaxy and protect civilization from the darkness between the stars. I am considering them, he said. That's why I'm going. Captain Vasquez nodded approvingly. Transport will be available in 30 minutes. Bring only personal items that have sentimental value. Everything else will be provided. Wait, Admiral Zareth said. You cannot simply abduct a Federation cadet. There are procedures, regulations. Admiral, Marcus interrupted, with respect, your procedures and regulations are about to get a lot of good people killed. My grandmother spent her life preparing for this moment. The least I can do is make sure her sacrifices meant something. He stood up, feeling the weight of 3 years of careful deception falling away like a discarded costume. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, Marcus Chun allowed himself to move with the fluid confidence his grandmother had trained into him. Cadet Chun, Commander Thek said, his mechanical voice carrying an odd note of respect. If you're determined to pursue this course, at least allow us to provide you with a proper send-off. Marcus paused at the door of the debriefing room. Sir, your combat performance today has been entered into your permanent record with a commendation for exceptional tactical thinking under pressure. Whatever happens next, the Academy will remember that you served with honor. As Marcus walked through the corridors toward his dormitory, he was aware of cadets stopping to stare at him. Word of the morning's events had spread through the Academy's informal communication networks with the speed that only young beings could achieve. Some of the looks were admiring, some were fearful, and some were simply curious about what the quiet human would do next. He found Lyria waiting by his dormitory door, her crystalline features reflecting the afternoon light in patterns that suggested deep thought. You're leaving, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. The ship that arrived, it's connected to your family somehow. Marcus nodded. It's connected to things my grandmother never told me about directly, but prepared me for anyway. Lyria's wings chimed softly as she processed this information. Will you come back? I don't know, Marcus admitted. I hope so. But if the Void Hunters are really returning, then you need to be wherever you can do the most good. Lyria stepped closer, her large eyes studying his face with the intensity that made Zephyrians such effective judges of character. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. The galaxy needs beings who are willing to be more than adequate. Marcus smiled, remembering her words from the library. Maybe you're right. Maybe being invisible isn't the most important thing after all. As he packed the few personal items he wanted to take with him, Marcus thought about the path that had brought him to this moment. 3 years of careful mediocrity, of hiding capabilities that his grandmother had spent years developing. 3 years of preparing for a quiet life of service that was about to be replaced by something far more dangerous. But as he sealed his bag and prepared to leave the Academy behind, Marcus realized that he wasn't afraid. Sarah Chun had raised him for this moment, had trained him to face threats that civilized beings preferred to ignore. The quiet cadet was finally going to war, and he was ready for whatever darkness awaited him among the stars. The only question was whether the galaxy was ready for what Marcus Chun was about to become. The Nightfall was nothing like the clean, standardized vessels that Marcus had trained on at the Academy. Every surface spoke of function over form, with modifications that suggested centuries of continuous warfare. The corridors were narrower, the lighting harsher, and the air carried the metallic taste of advanced life support systems operating at maximum efficiency. Captain Vasquez led him through passages that seemed to twist and branch in ways that defied the ship's external dimensions. Marcus recognized some of the technology from his grandmother's old photographs, but much of it was beyond anything he had seen before. The Nightfall is our newest generation of deep space operations vessel, Vasquez explained as they walked. Stealth systems that can hide us from any known sensor array, weapons that can punch through dreadnought armor, and speed capabilities that make Federation ships look like cargo haulers. How many ships like this do you have? Enough, Vasquez replied, which was clearly all the answer Marcus was going to get. They arrived at what appeared to be the ship's briefing room, though it was larger than Marcus expected. 20 people were seated around a holographic display table, and every one of them turned to study him as he entered. The diversity was striking. Humans of various ages and backgrounds, but all carrying themselves with the same controlled alertness he recognized from his grandmother. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Vasquez announced, "allow me to introduce Marcus Chun, great-grandson of Sarah Chun." The response was immediate and unsettling. Several people stood up, as if his grandmother's name commanded respect even decades after her death. An older man with scars that looked like they came from energy weapons approached with an expression of genuine emotion. "Sarah's boy," he said quietly. "I served with your great-grandmother during the Titan campaign. She saved my life more times than I can count." He extended his hand. "Colonel James Torres, Terrain Défense Initiative." Marcus shook the offered hand, feeling calluses that spoke of years holding weapons and tools. "She never told me about other family members." "Security protocols," Torres explained. "The fewer connections that could be traced, the safer everyone remained. But we've been watching your development from a distance, waiting for the day when you might be ready to learn the truth." Captain Vasquez gestured for Marcus to take a seat at the briefing table. "Colonel Torres commands our Tactical Operations Division. He's also the closest thing we have to an expert on Void Hunter capabilities." The holographic display activated, showing the same star charts Marcus had seen at the Academy, but with far more detail. Red markers indicated Void Hunter fleet positions, and the scope of their mobilization was staggering. "The situation is worse than what the Federation leadership has been told," Torres began. "Our deep space monitoring stations have detected over 5,000 Void Hunter vessels massing in the Dark Nebula. But that's not the worst part." The display shifted to show ship designs that Marcus didn't recognize. They had the angular, predatory look of Void Hunter technology, but incorporated elements that seemed to come from other species. "They have allies," Torres continued. "The Ashtar Dominion, a species that was thought extinct after the Galactic Purge Wars 3,000 years ago. The Crystalline Collective, machine intelligences from beyond the Galactic Rim, and others that our analysts haven't been able to identify." A woman across the table leaned forward. Marcus recognized her from Academy historical records as Dr. Sarah Kim, one of the foremost experts on xenoarchaeology. The archaeological evidence suggests that the Void Hunters have been preparing for this moment since their defeat at Kepler Station. They've spent 2 centuries building alliances with every species that has a grudge against galactic civilization. "What do they want?" Marcus asked. "The same thing they've always wanted," Captain Vasquez replied. "The complete subjugation of every living being in the galaxy. But this time, they're not just planning to conquer. They're planning to harvest." The holographic display showed images that made Marcus's stomach turn. Entire worlds stripped of life, their populations reduced to genetic material for purposes that the analysts could only guess at. "The Void Hunters have evolved beyond their original form," Dr. Kim explained. "They're no longer just a species seeking territory. They become something that views biological life as a resource to be processed and consumed." Colonel Torres manipulated the display to show tactical projections. Federation forces are preparing defensive positions, but they're using strategies based on 200-year-old assumptions. The Void Hunters are no longer the disorganized raiders they once were. They have discipline, coordination, and technology that makes our previous victory look like a lucky accident. "Which brings us to why you're here," Captain Vasquez said, looking directly at Marcus. "Your great-grandmother and the other War Council members didn't just defeat the Void Hunters through superior tactics. They used methods that the Federation considered too dangerous to acknowledge." Marcus felt a chill as he began to understand what they were suggesting. "What kind of methods?" An elderly woman at the far end of the table spoke for the first time. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. Psychological warfare. Marcus, your great-grandmother didn't just fight the Void Hunters. She taught them to be afraid. This is Commander Helena Nash, Captain Vasquez said. She served as tactical coordinator during the Kepler Station engagement. Commander Nash activated her own section of the holographic display, showing battle recordings that Marcus had never seen before. The Phoenix 7 didn't win that battle through superior firepower. It won by convincing an entire enemy fleet that continuing the engagement would result in something worse than military defeat. The recordings showed the final moments of the Battle of Kepler Station from the Void Hunter perspective. Marcus watched as his great-grandmother's ship approached the disabled enemy flagship, but the audio was what made his blood run cold. Sarah Chin's voice, transmitted on all frequencies where the enemy could hear it, speaking words and languages that shouldn't have existed. Threats that carried implications beyond simple military consequences. Promises of fates that would make death seem like mercy. She spoke to them in the dark tongue, Commander Nash explained. Languages that the Void Hunters themselves had developed for concepts too terrible for civilized species to understand. She told them what humanity was capable of becoming if they forced us to abandon civilization. Marcus stared at the recordings, trying to reconcile the loving great-grandmother of his childhood with the figure on the screen. How did she learn those languages? From prisoners taken during humanity's expansion wars, Colonel Torres replied. Before we joined the Federation, humans fought enemies that make the Void Hunters look merciful. We learned their methods, their technologies, and their psychological vulnerabilities. The War Council preserved that knowledge because they knew it would be needed again. Dr. Kim leaned forward, her expression serious. Marcus, your genetic modifications aren't just about enhanced reflexes and tactical awareness. They include psychological conditioning that allows you to use methods that would drive most beings insane. Your great-grandmother designed those modifications to create soldiers who could fight monsters without becoming monsters themselves. The weight of revelation pressed down on Marcus like a physical force. His entire life, everything he thought he knew about his family, had been carefully constructed to hide the truth about what he really was. So what happens now? He asked. Captain Vasquez stood up, her expression carrying the grim determination that Marcus remembered from his great-grandmother. Now you learn what your heritage really means. We have 6 months before the Void Hunter fleet reaches Federation space. 6 months to prepare defenses that go beyond conventional military thinking. 6 months to teach the galaxy that humanity hasn't forgotten how to be dangerous. The briefing continued for several more hours, covering tactical assessments, technological capabilities, and strategic projections that painted a picture of coming conflict on a scale that dwarfed any previous galactic war. But it was the final presentation that truly shook Marcus to his core. Commander Nash activated a restricted section of the ship's database, revealing files that carried security classifications he had never seen before. These are the complete records of the Terran War Council's activities during humanity's pre-Federation conflicts, including operations that were classified beyond the highest levels of Earth government. The file showed conflicts that had never appeared in any history Marcus had studied. Wars against enemies that seemed to come from nightmares rather than any rational species development. Battles fought with weapons that violated basic principles of civilized warfare. And victories achieved through methods that no one had ever dared to officially acknowledge. This is what your great-grandmother wanted to protect you from, Colonel Torres said quietly. Knowledge of what humanity is capable of when all other options have been exhausted. She hoped you would never need to learn these things. Marcus studied the files, seeing patterns of tactical thinking that went beyond anything taught at the academy. This wasn't just military strategy. It was warfare elevated to the level of art, practiced by beings who understood that sometimes the only way to protect civilization was to temporarily abandon it. The Void Hunters are counting on the Federation to fight according to civilized rules, Dr. Kim observed. They don't understand that humanity has experience with enemies who recognize no rules at all. Which is why we need you, Captain Vasquez concluded. not just as another tactical officer, but as someone who can bridge the gap between what the Federation thinks it needs and what the situation actually requires. Marcus looked around the briefing table at the faces watching him. These people had spent their lives preserving knowledge that most of humanity preferred to forget. They had maintained capabilities that civilized governments would never officially acknowledge. And now they were asking him to become part of that legacy. "What about my friends at the Academy?" he asked. "Lyria, Corex, the others. What happens to them when the Void Hunters arrive?" "That depends on whether we can prepare effective defenses in time," Commander Nash replied. "The Federation's conventional forces will buy us some time, but they won't be sufficient to stop what's coming. We need every advantage we can develop." Captain Vasquez moved to stand beside Marcus, her hand resting on his shoulder in a gesture that reminded him of his great-grandmother. "Marcus, your friends at the Academy represent the best of what galactic civilization has achieved. They're brave, intelligent, and dedicated to protecting innocent life. But they're not prepared for enemies who view those qualities as weaknesses to be exploited. And we are. We're prepared to do whatever is necessary," she replied, "even if it means becoming something that our friends would prefer not to understand." Marcus thought about Lyria's words in the Academy library. The galaxy might need humans to be more than adequate. He was beginning to understand just how much more might be required. "When do we start?" he asked. The response was immediate. Colonel Torres activated a new section of the holographic display, showing training schedules that would have intimidated Academy instructors. Dr. Kim began outlining psychological conditioning protocols that went far beyond anything in Federation manuals. And Commander Nash started explaining tactical concepts that had never been taught to civilized military forces. "We start now," Captain Vasquez said, "because in 6 months, Marcus Chun needs to be ready to face enemies that would make his great-grandmother's nightmares seem pleasant. The quiet cadet from the Academy is about to become something that the galaxy hasn't seen since humanity's darkest days." As the briefing dissolved into planning sessions and assignment protocols, Marcus felt the last remnants of his carefully constructed identity falling away. The mediocre student, the invisible presence in the dormitory corridors, the being who had spent 3 years trying not to be noticed. All of it was being replaced by something far more dangerous. He was about to discover what it truly meant to be Sarah Chen's great-grandson. And the galaxy was about to learn why humanity's enemies had once learned to fear the Darkpoint 6 months past like a fever dream of intensive training, psychological conditioning, and revelations that fundamentally changed Marcus's understanding of humanity's place in the galaxy. The Terran Defense Initiative's hidden facilities were scattered across dozens of systems, each one dedicated to preserving and developing capabilities that the Federation would never officially acknowledge. Marcus had trained in zero-gravity combat on stations hidden in asteroid fields. He had learned psychological warfare techniques in underground complexes that officially didn't exist. He had mastered weapons that violated several interstellar treaties and tactical doctrines that would have horrified his Academy instructors. But more than that, he had discovered what it meant to carry the genetic legacy of the War Council. The modifications in his DNA weren't just about enhanced reflexes and spatial awareness. They included psychological conditioning that allowed him to access mental states that would have driven unmodified humans insane. Now, as he stood on the bridge of the Nightfall watching the Federation's defensive fleet take up positions around Earth, Marcus understood why his great-grandmother had tried so hard to give him a normal life. The knowledge he carried, the capabilities he had developed, came with a price that few beings could pay and remain fundamentally human. "Federation forces are moving into final defensive positions," reported Lieutenant Chun, a distant cousin Marcus had met during his training. The Terran Defense Initiative had recruited from dozens of families with War Council connections, creating a force that shared both genetic heritage and historical purpose. Captain Vasquez studied the tactical displays with the calm expression she wore when facing impossible odds. Void Hunter forward elements will reach the outer system in 18 hours. Are our forces ready? Colonel Torres nodded grimly. As ready as we can make them in the time available. The Federation commanders have finally agreed to implement some of our tactical recommendations, though they still don't understand what they're really facing. The holographic display showed the approaching enemy fleet in all its terrifying scope. Over 5,000 ships, including Void Hunter dreadnoughts that have been upgraded with technologies provided by their new allies. But it wasn't the size of the fleet that worried Marcus. It was the formation patterns, which suggested a level of coordination and strategic thinking that went far beyond what the Void Hunters had demonstrated 2 centuries earlier. They've learned, he observed quietly. They've evolved, Dr. Kim corrected from her station at the Xenobiology Analysis Console. The psychological profiles we've developed suggest that the current Void Hunter leadership represents a fusion of their original biological nature with machine intelligence provided by the Crystalline Collective. They retain their species' predatory instincts, but now those instincts are guided by computational capabilities that can process millions of tactical variables simultaneously. Marcus thought about his friends at the Academy, now serving aboard Federation vessels throughout the defensive fleet. Lyria was assigned to a reconnaissance ship, using her Zephyrian sensory abilities to coordinate long-range scanning. Orcs and Drax served together on a heavy cruiser, their Carathian strength making them ideal for damage control operations under combat conditions. They were brave, skilled, and absolutely dedicated to protecting the innocent beings who looked to the Federation for safety. They were also completely unprepared for enemies who viewed courage and dedication as psychological weaknesses to be exploited. Signal from Admiral Zareth, Lieutenant Shin reported. The Federation command ship is requesting communication with our task force. Captain Vasquez nodded. Put her through. Admiral Zareth's image appeared on the main display, her Selenian features carrying the strain of someone who had finally understood the true scope of what they faced. Captain Vasquez, Federation intelligence has confirmed your assessment of enemy capabilities. We are requesting immediate deployment of all available Terran Defense Initiative assets. Understood, Admiral. Our ships are moving to assigned positions now. Captain, I need to ask directly. The tactical recommendations your people have provided, some of them involve methods that go against established Federation military doctrine. Are you certain they're necessary? Marcus watched Captain Vasquez consider her response. The Federation had finally accepted that conventional tactics would be insufficient against the approaching threat, but they still didn't understand what alternatives the situation might require. Admiral, the enemy we're facing doesn't recognize the rules of civilized warfare. They view our adherence to those rules as a strategic advantage they can exploit. To defeat them, we may need to temporarily abandon some principles we would prefer to maintain. Admiral Zareth's expression darkened. Explain. The Void Hunters and their allies fight to harvest biological material for purposes that would make slavery seem merciful. They don't seek territory or resources in any conventional sense. They seek the complete processing of every living being in the galaxy. Against such an enemy, limiting our response to methods that preserve our moral purity may not be an option. The connection remained silent for several moments before Admiral Zareth responded. Do what you must, Captain. But remember that when this is over, we still have to live with what we become. As the communication ended, Marcus understood that they had just received permission to implement tactics that the Federation leadership hoped they would never need to acknowledge. The galaxy was about to witness capabilities that humanity had kept hidden for 2 centuries. All ships, implement Condition Omega, Captain Vasquez ordered. Throughout the Terran Defense Initiative fleet, ships that had appeared to be normal patrol vessels began revealing their true nature. Stealth systems activated, making them nearly invisible to conventional sensors. And, most disturbing of all, psychological warfare protocols came online that would have terrified the crews of nearby Federation ships if they had understood what they were witnessing. Enemy fleet entering outer system, Lieutenant Chen reported. Estimated time to engagement, 6 hours. Marcus took his position at the tactical coordination station, feeling the weight of 6 months of training settling into place like a familiar tool. His console displayed information that went far beyond standard military intelligence. Psychological profiles of enemy commanders, developed from analysis of their behavior patterns. Vulnerability assessments based on understanding gained from prisoners taken during humanity's pre-Federation conflicts. And tactical options that had never been taught at any civilized military academy. "Marcus," Captain Vasquez called softly. "Are you ready for this?" He looked up from his console, meeting her eyes with the same calm expression his great-grandmother had worn during the Battle of Kepler Station. "I'm ready to honor the family legacy." "Good, because in a few hours, you're going to discover whether humanity really has learned to be something other than adequate." The hours that followed tested every assumption about warfare that the galaxy had accepted for 2 centuries. The Void Hunters approached Earth's defensive perimeter with the confidence of predators who had never encountered effective resistance. Their formations were perfect, their coordination flawless, and their technological advantages overwhelming. They had learned from their defeat at Kepler Station. They had adapted their tactics to counter every method the Federation might use against them. They had prepared for every possible defensive strategy that civilized military thinking could develop. But they had not prepared for humanity to remember what it had been before it became civilized. The first indication that something was wrong came when the Void Hunter Vanguard attempted to establish psychological dominance over the defending fleet. Their standard practice involved broadcasting terror frequencies designed to break enemy morale before physical combat began. It was a technique that had proven effective against every species they had encountered. The response they received was not what they expected. Every ship in the Terran Defense Initiative fleet began transmitting on frequencies that the Void Hunters recognized but had hoped never to hear again. The Dark Tongue, spoken with perfect pronunciation by voices that carried the authority of beings who understood exactly what they were promising. Marcus watched the enemy fleet's reaction with professional satisfaction. Their perfect formations began to waver as individual ship commanders started questioning whether continuing the advance was tactically sound. The Void Hunters' enhanced intelligence allowed them to process the implications of what they were hearing far more rapidly than their original biological forms could have managed. They understood, with computational precision, that they were facing an enemy that had fought things worse than they were and had won. Psychological impact, assessment positive, Dr. Kim reported. Enemy fleet cohesion dropping by 12% and continuing to decline. But psychological warfare was only the beginning. As the Void Hunter fleet closed with Earth's defenders, they discovered that humanity had spent 2 centuries developing technologies that went far beyond anything in Federation arsenals. Ships that could phase in and out of normal space-time, making them impossible to target with conventional weapons. Energy weapons that didn't just destroy enemy vessels, but left behind field effects that made the surrounding space unsafe for any biological life. And, most terrifying of all, boarding pods that delivered assault teams trained in methods that turned enemy ships into psychological weapons against their own fleet. Marcus coordinated the assault on a Void Hunter command vessel, directing teams that moved through enemy corridors like living nightmares. These weren't soldiers in any conventional sense. They were beings who had been trained to become the kind of enemies that the Void Hunters themselves had once been, and to do it more effectively than any species that had evolved those characteristics naturally. Target vessel neutralized, came the report from Assault Team 7. Crew processed according to Protocol Delta. Marcus tried not to think about what Protocol Delta involved. Some knowledge was too dangerous to examine too closely, even for someone with his psychological conditioning. They had been defeated by the realization that humanity was capable of becoming something that made their own species' predatory nature look civilized. Enemy fleet breaking off, Lieutenant Chin reported. They're withdrawing to minimum safe distance and requesting communication. The main display activated to show the bridge of a Void Hunter command ship. The creature that appeared was clearly the fleet commander, its enhanced form combining biological and mechanical elements in ways that should have been impossible. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that suggested multiple consciousness types operating in coordination. Humans of Terra, it said, the words carrying implications and frequencies that only trained xenolinguists could fully interpret. We withdraw our claim to this system and all territories under Federation protection. Our research suggests that continuation of this conflict would result in outcomes that our enhanced analytical capabilities classify as catastrophically suboptimal. Captain Vasquez moved to stand in front of the main display, her expression carrying the same calm authority that Marcus remembered from his great-grandmother's historical recordings. Void Hunter Fleet Commander, your species is welcome to exist in the galaxy provided you do not threaten Federation citizens or territories. Any future aggression will result in responses that your computational abilities are not equipped to process. Understood. We will communicate this information to all allied forces. The harvest protocol for this galaxy are hereby classified as indefinitely suspended. The communication ended, and the massive Void Hunter fleet began its withdrawal from the Sol system. Marcus watched them go with mixed feelings. The immediate threat,